happy to introduce Denese Taylor, who I'm going to let introduce herself because I don't want to mess it up. Go ahead, Denese.
Okay, I'm Denese Taylor. I am currently working part-time as an activity coordinator at an assisted living community for people with memory impairment. I started my career 18 years ago. For the first 10 years, I managed staff and I managed units in these areas with as many as 60 people who would have memory care impairment.
My understanding is this is a population that's growing in our country. Is that the information you're getting as well?
Absolutely. It's such a phenomenon right now because people are being introduced to it because they have family members now that are aging and starting to come up with it. But the numbers have been crazy for years. So it's not something that's changing. It's always been on the rise. I just think that people are more aware of it now because the baby boomers are now starting to get it. Lots of people are now being impacted with it.
It's a personal topic for me, given that my mother had what was called Lewy body dementia.
It's Lewy body.
Lewy body. Okay, thank you for that. I get tongue-tied even and talk about it, and she's passed 3 years ago. I recognized that she had dementia late in the game. I didn't know what was going on with her, and she couldn't tell me. I understand that people who are really intelligent, she's a really smart woman, they don't understand what's going on. She would say, and has said years before she passed, I don't feel right. And I didn't know what to do with that. I said, I don't know how to help you because I don't know. It's because she didn't know, right? What are some of the things that you're hearing from your patients in terms of what they're going through? By the time they come to you, are they uh, having memory lapses, or what's happening with your population?
It's usually not the person that's living with the dementia that comes to me. It's the family members that are dealing with it. Because I work in an assisted living community, then my introduction to them is very different. But because I also do counseling outside of the company, it's generally referrals like my children's friends, their parents are showing signs and they understand that I work in that realm. And so they'll ask me, my mom is doing this, or I'm kind of seeing this. Then I have that aha moment and I start teaching them what the illnesses are and what the warning signs could be.
Can you give me a couple of warning signs that are pretty prevalent?
The first thing to go is judgment. The last thing that develops in your brain is judgment, and the first thing to go is judgment. And so when they start making mistakes, judgmental mistakes, like if they go outside and it's very cold and they have no sweater on, and they're shaking, but they don't know to come back in the house and get a sweater. That's kind of like, oh, Ma, how come you don't have your sweater? Oh, yeah, I'm going to go get my sweater. And you're right. A lot of the residents that have it, a lot of the people who have the illness, they recognize that there's a change happening in them, but they can't articulate it. They don't know what it is. And a lot of times they'll try to hide it. You might not recognize it because they're hiding it. They don't want you to know that they know that they're slipping. Maybe you don't live with your mom, so you're not seeing the day-to-day kind of things. But when you go to the house and you notice that there's a pile of mail sitting on the table that they haven't opened, that's a red flag. She's not paying her bills. She doesn't see the urgency of the mail. She's not sorting through the mail. That's a red flag. Then you go, Mom, we're going to go to lunch. Go get your sweater. And she goes into the room and she stays a really long time. You're like, Mom, what's going on? You coming? I'm coming. And then she's agitated and she's annoyed with you because she has gotten there. She's in the room. She doesn't know what she's there for, because her short-term memory is gone. She doesn't remember what she just said or just did. But you don't notice that short-term memory loss because she can recall things that happened many years ago. Clearly, in your mind, there's nothing going on. There's nothing wrong. Then you go to the restaurant and you're talking over the menu, and she can't make a decision. What do you want, Mom? Well, what are you going to have? Well, I'm kind of looking this over. And this goes on for a much longer period of time than is ordinary. And you don't pick up on that cue that she's really confused because there's too many choices and you are becoming impatient. And so then she'll just say, I'll get what you get. Then you order. She'll say something like, where is the waiter? Oh, I'm ready to order. Oh, mommy, you've ordered already. No, I haven't. You don't want to argue because she is adamant that she has not ordered. Those are some of the earliest signs that people, when that happens, they start seeking help.
It's interesting because some of those symptoms are symptoms of getting older. You're going through some of those things. I'm going, wait a minute, I do that. The other thing is, I can see how it'd be easy to miss just because, for instance, I'm gonna talk about my mom, and let me just be honest. This is kind of hard for me, but
Mhm.
I want to do something that's personal. She loved food. She loved literature, and she loved food. From the time I was a little girl, picking out food at a restaurant was like sitting at the beginning of a movie, waiting for the previews to stop. So that wasn't a sign for me. That was just, okay, that's mom. She loves restaurants kind of thing. This was during COVID, first of all, which just made
Mhm.
everything harder. She would say things like, I want to go home. And because I was working from home and she was here, I didn't understand what that meant. And particularly since we've been in California for about 25 years, and it was just odd. What kinds of odd comments do you get from your population?
So for me, that's not odd. That's very common because they don't have short-term memories. They have long-term memory. When she says, I want to go home, she's not speaking of the house that she's living in. She's speaking of the house she either grew up in or started her family in. It's that long ago home. How I know this is because I would ask questions about it. Oh, so was it the house? Did it have a picket fence around it? No, and she starts describing the house, and you would recognize the house that she's describing as, oh, that was my grandparents' house. What's she talking about? She wants to go home. That's really common. It's confirming that it's the short-term memory that's gone, and it's the long-term memory that's present. She's living in her long-term memory.
Mhm.
That's vivid for her.
What kind of support do you give family and friends that are working with and caring for people with dementia?
The first thing I need to do is explain the illness so that they understand because it's going to change. I want them to understand the symptoms and the behaviors that may come along as decline starts to happen. My first goal is to educate them on what the illness is likely to do. And then I always try to get them to identify a support system. You can't do this alone. It's really, really hard. And there's other people in your boat, that are experiencing the same thing. I really think, there should be some kind of networking. I think that's what really needs to be developed is a networking where it's not caregivers necessarily that you're looking for, but support somebody who's living the same thing that you're living, who has a mom like you have mom that's experiencing difficulties, where you maybe can take your mom and visit her mom and give her some relief. She can then come to your home and visit with you and your mom and you get some relief. That's what I see is missing is that it's not the care it's not so much the caregiving because there are plenty of agencies where you can get caregivers to come in and help with showers and help with house cleaning and help with cooking and that kind of stuff. But they're not giving you the kind of support as the caregiver that lives with that person with dementia. You need an outing too. You need someone who understands at your level and can speak to the same kind of things that you're doing, and then you support each other.
Yeah, support is absolutely important. What kind of stigma are you finding with well, the community and families about people with dementia?
Yeah, I see it less now than I did when I first got into the business. Almost everybody has denial. That's the first thing that I'm fighting. When I do conferences with families, I will start explaining the disease, and they're like, "Oh no, my mom doesn't do that. No, my mom's not there yet. My mom is not like that." I get that 100% of the time. I need families to be open because if mom is not doing it now, I'm going to tell you she's going to be doing it or he's going to be doing it in the future because that is the way the disease goes. And then later on, I'll start to hear, oh, yeah, now I see what you're saying. Oh, my mom is doing this. Or all of a sudden, mom won't take a shower. So then I will teach them about the whys and then the how.
Once again, this is really a difficult subject for me to talk about. As you're talking, I'm thinking about those last couple of years. And from what I understand, my mom didn't, from the time that she started to become incapacitated, meaning the time of I want to go home, that kind of conversation and forgetting things, to the time when she passed was a couple of years. My understanding is that there are a lot of people who struggle for decades sometimes.
There are different forms of dementia.
Sure.
Dementia is an umbrella,
Yeah.
and there are different causes. There are different reasons why people get dementia. There are over 100 different types of dementia. The most common one is Alzheimer's. Probably 80% of people who are going to get diagnosed will be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. The second most common is called vascular dementia, and that's caused by strokes, people who have strokes. And then there's frontal temporal dementia, which affects people earlier in life. So you're usually going to see them with very bad symptoms when they're in their 70s,
Mm.
and that's pretty early. With Alzheimer's disease, you might have had it for 20 years before you start to see symptoms. So you can have it for decades. Lewy body dementia is generally associated with people who have Parkinson's disease. It's a
Mhm.
subsidiary dementia. Um, each one of those has their own kind of timelines. People living with Alzheimer's, they can live a very long time, but you're going to see a lot more symptoms because over time, Alzheimer's affects the entire brain. If you have vascular dementia, you are only going to have damage in the area where there was the stroke. They have more skill for a longer period of time. Frontal temporal dementia, you generally see that affect younger people, and they generally have an inappropriate sexual content. They may say inappropriate things, or they may try to touch people inappropriately. That's kind of common with frontal temporal dementia.
By younger, you mean what age ish?
I would say my experience has been people who are in their early 70s will come in with full blown frontal temporal lobe with very few skills, which means they've
Mm.
had it quite some time before they even came to me. But in their 70s, that's pretty young. That means they had it in their 60s and maybe 55.
And no one noticed, and they didn't
And
notice.
nobody, they notice the behaviors, but they can't explain it. They don't associate it with something that's happening in the brain. They just think it's inappropriate behavior. Oh, mom is wilding out. I had a woman who had two sons, and they were very distant because of that, because she would speak to them inappropriately. And they could not understand why or how nobody else's mom was talking to them like that. And then she's gotten so bad where she no longer has her words. She can't make sense of anything. Her starter and what we call the starter stop button. It's a mechanism in the brain that when you put a plate of food down in front of you, you begin to eat. When your starter button doesn't work, you won't, even though you're hungry. And so you have to get her started. With her, it wasn't with food, it was walking. So she was a wanderer, but she could not sit down even though she was tired. She would bump into walls. She could just see her almost blind walking up and down the corridors all day, all night. I'd have to just sit her down, stand in front of her, and keep her from standing. And then she would take a 15-minute nap. And then she'd get up and she'd start that process all over again. Different dementias do have some different symptoms, but a lot of the symptoms are so similar, people can get them mixed up. You won't know until you have a doctor diagnose it.
Sometimes personality changes happen.
Mhm.
Do you find that there are personality changes that go with certain types of dementia?
More people with Alzheimer's have a tendency to have a change in personality. But if the damaged area is their frontal lobe, and most people have frontal lobe damage that have dementia, they could have some personality changes because the frontal lobe, it is responsible for 7 areas of your behavior: alertness and concentration, judgment. There are 7. Would I name 3? Okay, I have a moment right now,
Okay.
but yes, if it's frontal lobe damage, and almost everybody has, you're going to see those kind of behaviors go missing.
Yeah, mom got frustrated. She didn't get mean and lost words. She always knew who I was, which was a gift
Yes.
because I know that that happens sometimes too.
Yes, it does. Um, the lost words is temporal lobe. So the temporal lobe is where your language center is. If the damage is there, then she's going to have what they call aphasia. And it comes in two parts. The first part is when she loses the words that she can actually say. She can't retrieve those words anymore, but she still knows the meaning of them. And if you say it, she'll understand it. And then as it declines more, then she'll lose the meaning of the words as well.
Oh my goodness, this is really hard to talk about. And I really have a lot of respect for you for working with this part of the population because it's going to be a large part of our population.
It's huge. I think one of the main things that needs to happen in our societies, we need more programs for teaching families and caregivers, because even caregivers that come out of some of these agencies are not trained in dementia. They know how to give showers and go to the store and the doctors and housekeeping and that kind of stuff, but they don't know understand the illness. They don't recognize that that's a behavior that they can't control. They think, oh, they know what they're doing. Oh, they know what they're saying. You know, one of the things in dementia is that people lose their filters. They can say insulting things, or they're like that 3-year-old. They say exactly what they see.
Yeah, one time, mom, it got to the point where I was making her meals, and I was fine with that. I'm being the caregiver, and I put it down in front of her, and she said, "Would you serve that to a guest?" I was like, "You're saying you don't like it, right?"
Right.
Okay.
That's that filter that we're talking about. You
At the
know,
time, it was annoying, but I was just like, "Okay, I get it. I
yeah,
get it."
no, I really worked hard at preparing that meal for you, mom, and you don't
And
appreciate it. I can hear and see both sides of that, but it is insulting to say that. But
yes.
you have to look from her perspective, is that she's saying what she's seeing. And you have to be in a place where you can't take that personally.
Yeah,
And so
you have to enter their world.
you have to go there dirty.
Don't get into an argument. You're gonna never be right, ever.
You can't argue with someone with dementia. You cannot, because you cannot reason with them.
Their world is totally different. Unless it's something that is dangerous, it doesn't really matter.
Well, now speaking of that, that's one of the first things that I tell families. When I go in there, I have two objectives: to teach them what the illness is, and the other one is to safety proof the house. I say, lock up all cleaning products, because at some point they'll look at a liquid, they see it's a liquid, they will try to drink it. And we have seen it. I had a friend whose father got diagnosed, and I was giving her all these tips and all these things to do, and she wasn't believing. She was in denial. And oh, my daddy's never going to do that. Oh, my daddy. And she'd look at me like I was crazy, to even suggest that this is going to happen. And I happened to say something about change the toothpaste to a natural toothpaste like Tom's, because at some point they may start eating the toothpaste and you won't notice that.
that
And
happens.
because they don't recognize what is food and what isn't, and particularly liquids. I said, so your cleaning products, all that must be locked away. Lock away your knives and your scissors, because at some point they may not understand how to use them, and they will cut themselves inappropriately. And I just happen to say, does your father use a razor blade, or does he use an electric razor? Oh, he shaves himself every day with a razor blade. I said, take the razor blade away and dart him with an electric shaver right now, because you're going to come one day in the morning and you're going to find blood all over the sink because he is cutting his face. And she didn't do any of that, because she could not believe that her dad, in the condition that he was in today, that particular day, was ever going to reach that point. Time went on, and I'm walking with her husband, and we're just chatting, and he's mentioning things about what dad is doing now and then. And I said something about, did she ever change the toothpaste? He said, do you know she was complaining about, why are we running out of toothpaste so fast?
Mm.
because dad was eating it. She was going after the fact instead of being proactive. She was acting on it as it was happening. But from that point on, then she went forward and listened to, started doing all the things I was advising her to do 2 months earlier. You know? And then she
Yeah.
got one day, she tried to get into the bathroom. He had opened the drawer so that the bathroom door wouldn't open. So she could not get in and help him with the thing that he was struggling with. So those are the kind of things I try to teach people. Safety proof the house. If they are wanderers, you never know. You may have to move the lock on the door so that it's very high, or put a deadbolt in, because they may go out in the middle of the night, because they're like babies. They stop sleeping all night. They start napping during the day because they're not doing anything all day. And they're not moving. They don't have enough exercise. They're not going for walks. And find that they're waking up in the middle of the night. Well, you're asleep. That doesn't stop them from walking out the door and walking down the street and getting lost. Finding people going up the up ramp on a freeway. I've had at least 3 residents come into our unit for doing that.
I know I wasn't sure if mom was going to wander or not. So I had a lock installed up high so that
Hmm.
but she wouldn't be able to. And as it turned out, she wasn't a wanderer, but I didn't know that. And I wasn't willing to take the chance. Denese, I was wondering if you could talk about your experience, your personal experience with someone who had dementia.
My mother-in-law didn't develop it until really end of life. She was very much independent, even though my ex-husband was living with her for safety reasons. But it wasn't until her last couple of years that we started to recognize that she had dementia. I didn't know as much about dementia as I know now. The one thing that struck me was that my ex-husband, who was caring for her, she couldn't remember his name. And she would refer to him as the man that takes good care of me. You can only imagine how hurtful that, would be. She didn't become incontinent until I think the last year of her life. She died at 94. I remember her 94th birthday in particular because she was so excited. She used to go to a daycare center to give her son some relief. So he had a daycare center, and she would be there helping the old people. She'd, help set the games up or help set the tables. What I know now is that giving them a purpose is very meaningful for them, and it really enhances their lives. That's what I work on when I work with residents in the community, is that you have to give them a purpose. It's okay if they fold napkins. It's okay if you ask them to sweep the floor, because these are chores that they've done throughout their lives, and then they feel like they're worthy. They have something to do. And a lot of times the families feel like my mom shouldn't be doing these things. That's what we hire you for. But it's not because we don't want to do it. It's because it gives them value. So taking my mother-in-law to the daycare center, she had a purpose. She always was a person that helped people. Her being there, that was natural for her. She would help pass out the games and pass out the food or whatever it is that she could do. And she was excited to do that. Now, this is her last birthday, but nobody knew that. And she was excited, so excited. I've never seen her so excited about her birthday before. We always had parties and her special cake, but this was very different. And it's almost like she knew this was going to be her last one.
Mm.
And I took her favorite cake, and she wanted it at the center so that she could show and share with all her friends there. And she knew all of our names and our relationships. This is my daughter-in-law. This is my grandson. She understood all of that. It wasn't until after that birthday, which was in August, that you started seeing the decline more and more. And she passed that December.
I see. What was it like for your family recognizing that she had dementia uh, at the
I don't
beginning?
think we ever really named it.
Mm.
I can name it now because I know it now. But at the time, it was just mama's gotten older. Yes, she's incontinent. This was something we've had other elderly people in our family get to that level. This was not foreign to us. But I, in retrospect, know that she had dementia by
Mhm.
some of the behaviors that we were seeing. She was a very mild-mannered woman her whole life. She was always positive. She always found the good in people. we might be talking about somebody and he was such a rascal, but she'd find that one redeeming quality. That's who she was. And she was that way to the end. She didn't have a change in personality. She just did not recognize the man that was taking care of her was her son, but me by my name. And some of the friends would pop by to come and see her, and she would call them by their names. That was that long term learning. And if you asked her what her son's name was, she could tell you. But she, looking at him, did not recognize him as her son anymore.
Got it.
That's
Yeah.
hurtful. Yes, that was hurtful.
That's part of recognizing, here I go again, stumbling. It's part of going into their world and recognizing that they're not meaning to be hurtful.
He knew that that was not intentional,
Right,
but
is what I'm trying to say.
it still hurts because I don't think any of us can fathom our own parent not knowing who we are.
Right.
When I explain that to families that I work with, I'm like, you are still there. They don't have the person that's standing in front of them because you probably don't look like the person that they're seeing. They're seeing you as that young boy. And how I was able to prove it to this man, because he said to me, I don't think I'm going to come and see my dad anymore. He doesn't even know who I am. I said, he knows you. He knows the essence of you. He doesn't recognize this body that's standing in front of him. And I proved it to him by saying, I used to be able to ask him, what's your son's name? And he had two sons, but there was only one he'd always tell me. And that was the son that was coming to see him all the time. And for a long time, he could tell me the son's name. But at some point, he reached a point where he couldn't tell me his son's name. I said, what's your son's name? And he'd just look at me. And then finally I said, who's Jay? That's my son. And he'd get this big smile and bright. So he knew he had a son named Jay. He couldn't articulate it when you asked him, what's my son's name? But he could tell me who his son was if I said it.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that in front of his son. I said, that's how you know he knows he has a son. And look at his face. He loves his son, Jay.
Yeah. Because it was COVID when mom was living up in a assisted living facility, I wasn't able to go every day. I had to make an appointment. It was horrible. And that was just part of how difficult that time was. I actually did find some support through USC, Department of Geriatrics, Alzheimer's.org, I believe it is. And what I found was a support group, and it was COVID, so it was online. And as you were saying before, talking with people who are going through the same similar experience was really, they got me through it.
Yes.
Not to mention that I have a wonderful network of friends that were supportive. Talking to somebody who knew was
Who's
just
living it? Who's living it
living.
just like you?
One of the things that one of the participants said that I thought was really interesting, she said, we don't know that much about dementia because no one comes back from it. And that just really impacted me. Of course, well, that makes total sense.
That's not an accurate statement, though, because there are some dementias that are curable. There are some dementias that are caused by medication. If you change the medication, the dementia goes away. There's some dementias that are caused by dehydration. If you hydrate people, then you start to see those symptoms go away.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, we call Alzheimer's disease the long goodbye because it can last for a long, long time. And we know that they're not going to recover from that because it affects the entire brain. They call it global dementia. The worst one.
Yeah, sure. And I think people get confused between dementia being an umbrella of different types different types. And I know that's how I thought at the beginning when I was learning about all of this.
Yes.
Oh my
And
goodness.
some people can have mixed dementias too. So, I mean, that's like a double whammy. So that I had a client that had Lewy body dementia and Alzheimer's disease. They're two different causes, but it has very similar symptoms and it just gets compounded.
There is a genetic component to this, from what I understand. Is that your understanding?
It's a small one. There's not that many people that have a genetic component, but there are some. If you can see it run in families. What they really have figured out is that more often than not, it's lifestyle.
Mm,
If you're passing on how you eat and how you exercise or don't, then you'll start to see generations. But there is a genetic factor to it, but it's not as many people impacted by that.
mm, good to know. I It crosses my mind. You know.
Absolutely. You want to know. They look at all your history, just like when I go to the doctor, they ask me about who has had diabetes, who has had cancer, and they start looking for those kind of things because there could be a genetic factor. But like diabetes, and this is something we really should talk about in the Black community because we have a very high a population of people who are diabetics.
Uh-huh.
And there's such a high correlation between diabetes and Alzheimer's disease. They're calling it type 3 diabetes.
Oh
People
my.
who have diabetes that start to get Alzheimer's. They're now calling it type 3 diabetes. So that is type 2 diabetes is all lifestyle changes. If you are eating a heart healthy diet, if you are doing physical activities, and if you are doing mental activities, the research has said those are the three things that can change your path on whether or not you get dementia, particularly Alzheimer's dementia, or if you get it even later than most. They know that if you do these things, you may be able to prevent or at least get it later in life. The average person, if they reach a certain age, it increases incrementally as you age. If you see someone who has symptoms at age 70, they probably started when they were 50. If you see people who average, and it's usually around 80, 85 that you start seeing the symptoms. Well, they probably had it since they were 60. But if you have been doing those lifestyle changes throughout your life, or if you've been eating well throughout most of your life, you may not see those symptoms until 85 or 90. I have worked with groups that come in the early stages. We take a test, we give them a test. It's kind of a mini cognitive test. It's not a neurological test. And if they test somewhere between 27 and 30, we feel that they are very high functioning. They're in the very, very early stages of their Alzheimer's disease. What are we going to do? We're going to do intense activities. So they're in
Mm,
a special program where we read every day. It's not just the reading. It's reading out loud because when you read out loud, you retain what you've read better than when you read to yourself. When you have that discussion, what is the meaning of this? What does this word mean? How else can we use that word? Then you are exercising your brain. If you are doing problem solving, that's ways of exercising your brains. Having a debate is a wonderful way of exercising your brain. Arguing the point of view that you don't agree with is an even better way to exercise your brain.
I
So
stay
we've
away from
learned,
arguing.
right?
I
I used
stay
to
far
tell them,
away from arguing.
I said, if you fuss with your husband, you're doing a good job. Your brain is happy. So we gave them this very intense program of activities every day, 7 days a week. They would go to this program and they would do this reading, this discussion, this math, all kind of things that we would do. Then we would test them every 3 months. And I can tell you, I had people in the program for 5 years that did not decline. Now, the decline is inevitable. It's going to happen. Once you have Alzheimer's disease, it doesn't go away. There's no cure for it, but you can slow it down if you catch them in the early stages. Now they have developed some new tests and some new medications. The very new, I've just been hearing about, I went to a seminar from one of the pharmaceutical companies that developed this new drug. The problem is it only works for people who are in the early stages. Most people don't know they're in the early stages. So now they've just developed a blood test. So when you go for your physical, they can give you a blood test just like they do for sugar or any cholesterol or anything else. And they can tell you that you are in the early stages. You're just now developing Alzheimer's disease. And then you can start this intervention. But most people don't want to know. If you're in your 50s, you don't want to know that you're going to have dementia by the time you're 80. Most people don't want to know. That's what we found. I think that part of the culture is going to have to change where you're willing to get tested early so that you can see. And if you have a propensity to get it, there are things that you can do to delay the onset. Heart healthy diet is also very, very important. We know in our community, we don't eat very well, you know, as a group. We need to start changing that and we need to move. We have to move. They're now calling sitting like we're doing here, they're calling it a sitting disease.
Oh my goodness.
I just saw this recently, an article called The Sitting Disease. And what they found is that if you, like everybody says, exercise 30 minutes a day. Well, if you exercise for 30 minutes a day and you sit for 15 hours a day, you have not really helped yourself. Now, I'm not saying don't do that 30 minutes of exercise, but what they
Right.
are suggesting what they are suggesting is that you get up every hour or every hour and a half or often and move around for 5 minutes. Then you go back to sitting. And so if you work in an office, that might be a little bit hard, for you to get all your work done when you're jumping up every hour. But this is what they're saying that needs to happen is that we need to move our bodies. It doesn't have to be that full flown exercise. It's just moving. They said, even if you're squirming, if you're sitting down and you're fidgeting and you're tapping your foot, that's movement. That is what they need. The body needs every hour for 5 minutes or 2 minutes.
Well, my goodness, you're talking about my world. As a psychotherapist, I'm sitting 50 minutes. Fortunately, I have a 10-minute gap. And for the most part, I get up and do what I need to do. But my goodness, after this, I'm going to take a walk. Can you think of any experiences that the families have gone through that were pivotal in your thinking about your work or things that helped them and that realizations that they had?
I think for me, it's building their confidence, particularly when they bring them into a community. You're putting your loved one, your mom, who you just adore, in the hands of strangers. And for me, my job was to make sure that you felt comfortable, that I can convince you that I care about your mom. And I will always say that I can't take your place, nor do I want to, but I can take good care of her. I know how I felt about my mother, my grandmother, my great grandmother. I was lucky to have great grandmother. I knew how I felt about my parents and my family members. I would do nothing less for yours. So building that confidence, because the more I learn about this disease, the more I can share with you. And then I'm going to teach you how to come and visit. Because what they would do, I have one family in particular. They'd come and they would linger and drag their goodbyes, and that was about them. But they would make the resident who had to stay anxious, and we would have all these behaviors after they leave. So finally, I would say, "Now listen, when you come in, when you're ready to go, you say, 'Okay, Dad, I got to go to work. Bye bye. I'll see you tomorrow,' and you leave. You don't keep dragging that out. And then guess what? He's going to be okay because he understands routine. He understands that you come and you go. He may not recognize that it's been 2 weeks or 2 days because they don't tell time anymore. But he does recognize that you come and you go. Then he gets comfortable with your leaving. You're not comfortable leaving. My goal is to make sure that families are comfortable and that I can teach them to trust and teach them what to expect. And if you're living at home, the biggest challenge for me is to get families to do what I'm telling them to do. What I find is they don't really want to do it. They want me to come in and do it. I'll do it for 2 weeks and I'm doing it, but you must be here so that you can watch how I'm interacting with your parent because I get their parents to do the things that they can't get the parents to do. And mainly it's because of their own behavior, the way they are talking. You cannot be the parent and the child. Now you have to be the parent. You're no longer the child. They can't make their own decisions now. You cannot allow mommy to take her own medication. You have to monitor that because she won't remember if you took it or not. Or I'll say, when's the last time mommy had a bath? Oh, she takes her bath. How do you know? Did you watch her? No. Well, then how do you know she took a bath? Because she said so? Come to find out, mommy hadn't had a bath in a week. So then mommy won't let me help her because she's modest. She's not used to you seeing her body, but I can go and help her. So that's when you might need that caregiver to come in and help mommy bathe because she's more likely to do it with a stranger than she is with you. With those kind of tips that I tried to teach families, it's not a one size fits all.
Absolutely.
Because I have a book that I've written called Dealing with Dementia, a guide for 15 million caregivers. When I wrote the book, I didn't think I was writing about dementia. I was writing about my activity program because everybody was marveling at the things that I could get my residents to do in terms of arts and crafts and, that kind of stuff. So it started out as an arts and craft book. Then the family that I was telling you about that didn't safety proof the house like I told them, she started asking me all these questions about her dad, who was my age, who was diagnosed. And by the questions she was asking, I'm like, oh, I need to put this in the book. That's how the book evolves. That's where I tell them about safety proof in the house or safe return bracelets that you can get from Alzheimer's Association if you have a wanderer that comes out, changing the locks on the door, those kind of things.
When was the book published?
Whew. It's probably been close to 10 years by now, I'm sure.
Well, then look on Amazon for it, huh?
No, it's on the book patch. I self-published. It's on the book patch, and I can actually send you the link. It tells you it's very important to create a routine. You do the same thing every day. It may seem boring to you, but routines make the resident feel safe. They know what's coming. If I do chair exercises with them, I do the exact same exercises every single time so that when I come in, I'm like, okay, take a deep breath in. They know what's coming next. I make a routine, what a typical day might look like from the time they get up to from the time they go to bed. How they should have meals at the same time every day. Because if you ask them if they're hungry, 99% of the time they're going to say, no, I just ate. And if you don't give them breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you don't know if they've eaten or not. Those are the kind of things that I'm teaching in the book. Those are the kind of things I teach in workshops and seminars.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting the link. I want to put that on this podcast. This has been great information. Thank you so very much for joining me.